This is the Project 3 video. Guys, this is your last project for this course. So that's exciting. Okay, it gives us this prompt. It says Jade and Juliet are riding their bikes across the country to promote autism awareness. They rode their bikes 45.4 miles on the first day and 56.3 miles on the second day. From now on, Jade and Juliet plan to ride their bikes 62 miles per day. If the entire trip is 7,878 miles, how many more days do they need to ride? Okay, so that's our prompt for the whole project. Part 1 asks you to write a short script that could be used to make a video about this cross-country bike trip. Provide a short character description, dialogue between the characters, and directions, but keep the script simple. So here, this is really where you can kind of be creative with this project, right? So you could create some sort of a scenario for maybe why Jade and Juliet are doing this bike across the country to promote autism awareness here, and then it kind of just have a few different dialogue between Jade and Juliet. But however you feel, whenever you read this, like whatever scenario you think of in your head, just kind of write this here. Again, it doesn't have to be long, but you do have to make sure it's at least, maybe half a page. That shouldn't be too hard. Okay. So that's actually all you do for part 1. That's it. There's no math really in part 1. Part 2, this is where the math starts to happen. Okay, so it says create an equation to determine how many more days Jade and Juliet need to ride their bikes. Okay, so remember that when, so this is, let me get a pen. That might be helpful instead of an eraser. So this is part 2. Okay, this is number 1. When we're creating an equation, remember we use y equals kx plus c. Okay, y is the total, k is your rate, and c is your constant. So when we are given this description here, right, it says that they rode their bikes 45.4 miles on the first day and 56.3 miles on the second day. Okay. Then it says that they plan to ride their bikes 62 miles per day, and the entire trip is 2,878 miles. So given all of these numbers, we need to figure out which one's the total, which one's the rate, and what is the constant. So the total is probably the easiest, right? It says the entire trip is this many miles. So that means that y is 878. Now the rate, okay, remember that your rate, one way you can tell your rate is if something says per blank, right? This says 62 miles per day. So since it's 62 miles per day, that's my rate. So my k is 62. Now my constant. The constant is where they're starting at, right? On the first 2 days, they have already traveled 45.4 miles and 56.3 miles. So since this is the distance they traveled on day 1 and day 2, I need to figure out where they're starting on day 3. Okay, so to do that, I would take this 45.4 and add it to 56.3. When I add these two together, let me pull open a calculator. When I add these two together, that will give me my C, my constant. That's where they're starting, 56.3. So that means they're starting at 101.7 miles. So this is my C. Okay. So that means that when I replace all of these variables, right, with my numbers, your equation should look like this. I'm going to try and fit this all in here. Why do I keep putting the 7 first? 878 equals 62x plus 101.7. So this right here should be your answer for number 1. That's your equation. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this, and then I'm going to rewrite this equation up here in blue. So I still have my eraser. So 2878 equals 62x plus 101.7. Okay, so that's our equation. Looking at number 2, it's asking how many more days do Jade and Juliet need to bike in order to complete their trip? Round your answer up to the nearest whole day. So number 2 is asking us to take this equation we have and solve for x. Okay, so 2 is basically saying solve for x. Okay. Remember, when you're solving equations, you do inverse operations, which is the opposite of the math that is happening. So here is my equation. Okay, so remember, you want to isolate your x, so that means you need to get rid of everything that's on the same side as your variable. So start furthest away, right? I have a plus 101.7. So opposite of adding is subtracting. And then anything you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. So I'm minusing 1.1.7. Here, make sure that you are using a calculator, because since we're talking about decimals, you don't want to get that confused. So 2,878 minus 101.7 gives us this 2776.3, and that's equal to 62x, right? Because that's what we have left. Then we are, remember, whenever you have a number next to a variable, that is multiplication. So opposite of multiplication is division. Okay, so we're going to take this answer that we have here, and we're going to, so I have 2776.3, and we're going to divide that by 62, and I get 44.78x. Okay. However, if you notice, it wants us to round your answer up to the nearest whole day. So if I were to take this and round it up to the nearest whole day, it would take about 45 more days. 45 more days. So 3 says describe how you created your equation from number 1. So that's going back to what I had before I erased this, where we identified the total, our rate, and our constant. So that's a good answer for 3, identifying the total, rate, and constant. And then 4, explain the process you use to solve the problem. So all these steps that we show right here, that is what you could type out here. Try your best with the division. What I do to show this when I'm typing it is I just highlight it and then I underline it to get that line. And then I just space until the 62 is underneath it. If that makes sense. If not, you can just write divided by 62. That's fine too. Okay, I think that's it for part 2. That's it for part 2, so I'm going to erase this so we can go on to part 3. Okay, part 3. So this is now part 3. Okay, so for part 3, you have a little bit of freedom. You can either create a graph, create a table, or a diagram. It doesn't matter which one you choose. I decided to give you a table template to help you in case you wanted to use it. So again, if you don't want to use this, that's fine, but I'm only going to go through the table in this video. So I'm given this table, right? Notice my X is number of additional days, and then my Y is the total miles biked. Okay, so this table is 0 is starting technically on day 3, right? Because this is how many miles they bike those first 2 days. Okay, so let's see. 1. So what you do for number 1 is essentially just complete this table or draw your graph or your diagram. So I'm going to copy part of the table. I'm not going to do all the table, but I'll show you how to do it. So we use 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 10. So you're given 101.7. Remember, this is their starting point. That's the constant, which is why it has a 0. And then remember that the prompt said that they are biking an additional 62 miles per day. Okay, so when I increase by 1 day, I am also increasing by 62 miles, right? So to go from this 101.7, I'm adding 62 to get this 163.7. So I can show it to you guys on a calculator. So when I have 101.7 and I'm adding 62, I get 163.7, right? Because that's how many miles they're biking that extra day. So again, when I go from 1 to 1, let me do this in a different color. When I'm going from 1 to 1, sorry, 1 to 2, I'm adding 1 day, which means I'm adding 62 miles. Okay, so you have this 163.7 plus 62, and that's how I get this number here. So a shortcut way of doing this, right, so because sometimes what happens, well, the table's going to eventually start skipping, right? It goes from 3 to 10, which is a big jump, and I don't want to have to figure out like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way to get to 10. So what you could do is, remember our equation was it was 2878 equals 62x plus 101.7, right? So I'm looking at this part over here, right? This x are these x's here, okay? So, because if I have 0, right, if I replace this x with a 0, I'd have 62 times 0, which is 0, plus 101.7, which gives me this. So if I take 62 and I multiply it by 1, right, I get 62. And then if I do 62 plus 101.7, I get this 163.7. Now let's do that if I have x is 2. Okay, I have 62 times 2, I get 124 plus 101.7, I get this 222.5. So for 3, I do 62 times 3, I get 186, and then I need to do 186 plus 101.7, which tells me that this answer here is going to be 287.7. Don't forget to add this plus 101.7 at the end. That's super important. Okay, so for the next one, right, x is 10 now. So I have 62 times 10. So 620 plus 101.7. So that means this here is 721.7. So you're going to do that for all the rest of the table. Okay, so you're going to take these x numbers, multiply it by 62, and then add 101.7. Okay. And then it says, explain the process you used to solve the problem. So what you could say here for number 2 is something along the lines of, I took the equation I made and I multiplied my number of additional days by 62, then added 101.7, or something for how you got these answers. 3 says, how is this method similar? Well, it's similar because we use the same expression, right? So this is number 3. I use the same expression to find values. Number 4, how is it different? Well, for 4, you could say it's different because for the table, right, I found multiple total distances based off different days, versus the equation, I found the answer right away. And 5, which method seems to be easier? That's up to you, whether or not you like to look at this table because you like seeing it step by step, kind of broken down a bit, or if you like the equation where it's just straight to the point. Whichever one you think is easier, and then explain why. And that's it. That's the last part of this project. So hopefully this helps you complete the rest of it. I helped you out with a lot of the math. The rest of it is just kind of explaining. which I gave you hints for. So if you still need help with this, or if you're confused on something, please let me know and we can work it out together. Guys, this is your last project. It is due on October 4th, which is that Friday right before fall break. So if you get this done and you've done projects 1 and projects 2, you're in great shape. If not, let me know and we'll work on it together. Okay. That's all I got. So hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day and let me know if you need help. I'll talk to you later. Bye.